Good morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to today's show. My name is Stacy Bartschinger. I'm a State House reporter for the USA Today network newspapers in New Jersey. We are here today to talk about SALT, not the seasoning, the state and local tax deduction. I have three guests here with me today that are going to take you through this about half-hour show. First, I'd like to introduce Tax Watch columnist David McKay Wilson of New York's Journal News. David, good morning.
Yes, thank you. Glad to be here.
And we have two congressmen with us. Of course, Congressman Josh Gottheimer, who represents New Jersey, Northern New Jersey, and Northwest New Jersey.
Never New York, Stacey.
He wishes he was in New York.
Yeah, right. Are you kidding me? The best pizza, Stacey, it was rated in Jersey, and Suozzi knows it.
This is off to a great start. Good.
Wine magazine. Come on.
And of course, Congressman Tom Suozzi of actually New York, representing parts of Queens and Long Island. Congressman, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Okay, I want to start. Let's clarify. We're not talking about seasoning. Dave, can you take us through really quickly what SALT is and what we're talking about here today?
Yes, this is the tax, the SALT, or the tax of the state and local taxes and the deductibility of them. Local taxes, including your property taxes, and then the state taxes, the state income taxes. Before the Congress acted in 2017, you had unlimited deductions of all this. Then during the tax changes that year, they needed to save a certain amount of money to make the numbers work, and this was they put the cap on the SALT deductions, and it at $10,000, and there's a lot of people who couldn't take their full deductions. At the same time, they also increased the standard deduction, so fewer people were itemizing. So there was some mitigation of it through that, but that's kind of the basic layout of it.
Great. And so the congressmen who are with us today both support removing that cap. And I want to give you each a chance to just give sort of an opening statement, a brief statement of why that is. Congressman Gottheimer, would you like to start?
Thank you for deferring to Jersey. I'm actually, if it's okay with you, I'm going to turn to my dear friend from New York because I want him to feel some love. Tom Suozzi.
Well, listen, Josh and I are 100% aligned on this, as well as many of our other colleagues. This was a body blow to New York and New Jersey and other similarly situated states. We're high-tax states. There's no question about it. We have higher incomes of our people here. Our taxes, our property taxes are high, and our income taxes are higher than most places in the country. Why? Because we do more things. We have a lower rate of uninsured children. We have a great mass transit system. We have more unions where people make decent wages. And this is a body blow to us because it is hurting not only families that are making $100,000, $150,000 a year, which would be like a teacher and a carpenter. They'll make $150,000. They have easily $25,000 in taxes between their property taxes and their income taxes. And they are capped at this $10,000 amount. So this is hurting those families. But it's also chasing people out of our state that are high income people that are going to Florida. They went during the pandemic as well, and they saw, well, we can work remotely, and I can spend 6 months in one day in Florida. I don't have to pay my state income taxes or my property taxes anymore, and I can save a lot of money. Well, we don't want to lose those people, because when we lose those people, who's left behind holding the bag but middle class and lower income people that are either going to see their taxes go up or get their services cut to fill up that gap. So that's we got to fight to keep this. No SALT, no deal. We said to the president, we support you. We're with you 100%. We want to get a big, bold infrastructure deal done, but you must include the state and local tax deduction in any deal that's done that affects our tax code. No SALT, no deal.
I'll just add to that, Stacey, okay, if I jump in, and thank you both for having us. Very grateful. The reason why this discussion is so important is because really this is an existential threat to states like mine and Tom's. You have what's in 2017, the red states, to pay for tax cuts for themselves, decided they were going to have us pay their bill. It's not that it's not much more complicated than that. They looked at it and said, we're going to take SALT, which had always been on the books since 1913, and said every time you pay your state property taxes and your state income taxes, before you pay your federal taxes, you can deduct what you paid so you don't get taxed twice on the same income. Then comes along 2017, and the red states, I like to call moocher states, they turned around and said, we're going to have New York, Jersey, states like ours pay for it. So they capped it out, and they said you cannot deduct more than $10,000 before you pay your federal taxes. So when Tom says this is having a real impact on cops and firefighters and teachers, 2 teachers in my district in northern New Jersey are making nearly $200,000 combined family income. Their SALT tax on the average that they would normally deduct is over $17,000. The median property tax bill in Bergen County is $15,000. Since that's more than $10,000, that means suddenly all above $10,000 you're paying taxes on. So this is not, if you're in Alabama, and this is my best comparative that I think I can make on this, because some people are saying, well, this is not really an issue for many of us. If you're in Alabama, your average property tax is $550 a year. That's it. Compared to $15,000 in Bergen and Tom Suozzi's district, they can be even higher in a lot of areas. That means that our taxes went up. All we're fighting for is saying, let's get our taxes down and make life more affordable for middle-class families, because this is a middle-class issue where we live in Jersey and in New York. It's an expensive place to live. I wish the taxes would come down, but in the meantime, we got to make things more affordable for folks. We can't afford to have higher taxes. We need lower taxes, and that's why Tom and I are on the same page here.
And let me just add one more thing, if I can, Stace.
Sure.
When Josh refers to the moocher states, okay, and the idea that this was to subsidize the red states, give them a tax cut. New York and New Jersey are 2 of the biggest donors to the federal government. We send more money to the federal government from our residents and their income taxes than we get back than any other state in the country. We're the biggest net subsidizers of the federal government, whereas the red states are the biggest net takers, for the most part, with the exception of Texas, the biggest net takers from the federal government. So we don't want to keep on saying, we'll do our job as far as helping out our poor brothers and sisters in other parts of the country, but don't hurt us every single time.
Right. And they think we could just pay for this is just a question of they think we can pay for it. Right. And they say, listen, and as Mississippi gets $4.38 for every dollar cent that they send to the federal government, we get back in Jersey 67 cents. And so they figure, well, we can pay the bill. The problem is, as Tom said, and this is really important, people are leaving, right? The U-Hauls are full, out of state. They're leaving. They're not coming in. It's why United Van Lines had Jersey as #1 out-migration state in the country for the last 3 years. And the problem is that a lot of people who are leaving tend to be middle and upper middle and upper income earners. And what does that mean, as Tom said, which is so important? It means that the tax base goes down. The amount of money, there's a huge erosion in the taxes that come in to the state governments. Those are for key things like roads, like you're showing on the screen right now, schools, right? Programs that are really important for hard-pressed families, right? And how are we going to pay for those things if everybody leaves? Because they say it's just too expensive.
Well, Congressman, I want to interrupt you. Let's a bunch of issues that we need to talk about that you both have just touched on. So first, let's talk about this idea that people are leaving your states. I think census numbers just came out. They showed population growth in both New York and New Jersey over the last decade. So how can you say people are leaving because of this tax cap?
Well, it's a very moderate growth that you see in both of our states. It would have been much higher if we had our full deductibility of our SALT deduction, I believe. But this has been going on for a long time. This is not a new phenomenon. It's just been made worse by the SALT cap and now by the pandemic. I mean, when I was born, New York State, in 1962, had 43 members of Congress. Today, we have 27 members of Congress, and it's going down to 26 members. We're losing a seat in this new census. So even though we saw a modest increase in our population, our relative population has gone down. This has been exacerbated. So the SALT deduction made it worse. So we're facing a competitiveness challenge over a long period of time. We need to make our states more competitive. There's no question about it. We faced that over a long period of time. It was made worse by the SALT cap, capping it at $10,000. Then we got the pandemic. Then it was like put on steroids, and people moved out of the area. And now people are realizing I don't know if I'm going to go back, because think of how much money I can save.
Also, that population argument's absurd, right? To the census argument. It's all, as Tom just said, it's all relative. Our relative growth, the rest of the country grew. Ours grew less. Why? Because people aren't coming here. And also, you have to dissect who's leaving, right? So even if 50 people came and 100 people left, right? Who were the people who left? And how much money was in their pocket when they left? When they hightailed for Florida, Texas, North Carolina, and other places, South Carolina, places that have lower taxes, right? That's actually the real fundamental question. Who's leaving and what are they taking with them in their pockets? And jobs.
And a lot of young entry-level position people are coming. A lot of young people want to go live in Brooklyn, or live in Hoboken, or live on some apartment area, and it's fun and it's a exciting place to be. But they're entry-level positions often. Who's leaving, as Josh pointed out? Small business owners that realize they can run their business from out of state, that are bringing with them large incomes. Wall Street hedge funds moving over, and JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs talking about moving all their back office operations down to Florida, down to Palm Beach, down to Miami. So we're losing these people's incomes in the process. And the people, how many people, if you live in this area, David McKay, he's dying to say something, but how many people have you met that say, listen, it's a teacher, it's a union worker, it's somebody who's making $150,000 a year, let's say, between the husband and wife. When I retire, I'm going down to South Carolina. When I retire, I'm going to Arizona. When I retire, I'm going to North Carolina. When I retire, I'm going down to Florida. Why? Because they can take their pensions with them. They can just live a lot more cheaply down there. This has been going on for years. It was just made a lot worse with the SALT cap.
Yeah. Now, one of the issues, I know Josh mentioned it, where he talked about this being an issue for the middle class in our region. There was a report by the Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy this year that showed that the top 1.6 million filers for income tax, these are people earning over $644,000 a year, would receive 62% of the benefits from the repeal of the SALT deduction, an average of $38,000 each. And then the next highest earners, and the next 4% highest, people making over $263,000 would get 24% of the benefits. So you have 5% of the top filers getting 86% of the benefits from the SALT repeal. So this seems like it's a giveaway to the richest Americans, and it's not really getting at the middle class.
I just think that I looked at that study, and there's a lot of holes with that study. Number one, remember that, and I had this debate the other day with somebody. I said, wait, so you're saying if a family of a teacher and a firefighter save $1,000, well, so it's only $1,000. That person's going to save $15,000. I said that when you're making that kind of money, $1,000 is meaningful. So let's never ever talk about actually meaningful differences for hardworking middle class families. Saving $1,000 is a huge difference. It's paying down college, or it's not paying down that community college. One. Two, the Star Ledger reported recently, and I want to make sure I get this number right because Jonathan Salant's reporting. He said nearly a third, if we reinstated SALT, nearly a third of New Jersey residents, almost 3 million, would get tax relief. 80% of them have incomes of $216,000 or less. That's hardly a 1% issue. Again, 80% of incomes $216,000 or less. I think this is about getting tax relief for all families in Jersey and in New York whose taxes went up in 2017, and that's what I'm focused on. I'll turn to Suozzi here to add in.
Yeah, I want to make it very clear. Those are calling for votes. I want to make it very clear that there are wealthy people that benefit from this. There's no question about it whatsoever. We don't want them leaving our state to go to other states. I'm in support of raising the top rate from 37 back to 39.6. I just want to make it so that wealthy people are paying wherever you go in the country. I don't want to give you an incentive to leave my state to go to other states. So, for example, Janet Yellen, who's the Secretary of the Treasury, says she wants to do a corporate international global minimum tax where you pay the same so countries are not fighting with each other for a race to the bottom. I agree with that. I don't want to have countries fighting with each other, especially our allies, as to who takes our employees away from New York to go to Ireland or go to Europe to locate their business there instead. We don't have a race to the bottom, who can cut their taxes less, provide less services. We don't want that to happen in America either. When you leave New York and you go to Florida, which is what happens because of this, you go to a place where they don't insure their children. They don't have insurance programs for their children down there. They don't have sewers. They have, red tide problems going on in the Gulf of Mexico and on the shores of Florida because of that. You go to Texas, they don't regulate their utilities. Their utilities got shut down because it got cold outside. They don't have mass transit systems like us. California, which is on our team, they're hit by this so bad. They've been talking about climate change for 25 years and making changes as we have in New York and New Jersey. But in Washington, we're still talking about whether it's a hoax or not. So it costs more money in our states. There's no question about it. But we don't want the federal government creating a competition that says, hey, if you go to this place, it's a lot cheaper. And on top of it, back to the argument that Josh was making, you're in the top 20% of wage earners in the United States of America if you make $150,000 a year. Again, $150,000 a year where we live in New York and New Jersey, you're middle class. You're not rich. You may be rich if you're in Oklahoma, you're in North Dakota, you're in some of these, North Carolina, South Carolina. You may be a wealthy person with $150,000. But here, you're middle class. So you're still in the rich people group, the top quintile, the top 20%, but you're not rich. You're rich in the context of America overall, but you're not rich.
And that's, Tom, what point Tom's making, I think, is so important. It's this comparative. People are making a comparative, David, and saying, if you live in Oklahoma versus Jersey and looking them at exactly the same on the income base and saying, wow, it's benefiting that person who's making $150,000 or $200,000 in Jersey or New York. Man, that's really taking care of someone who's wealthy. You're a cop and a teacher, or someone who's working, a building trade and a teacher, that family, you deserve to get a break. And that's the point. In Oklahoma or Alabama, when you're paying $550 in property taxes, sure, I would argue you don't need it. But that's a different situation. And Tom's other point, which is so important, I hope that people walk away today remembering what Suozzi just said. Those states don't take care of people the way we take care of our hard-pressed families. Whether you're talking about healthcare, whether you're talking about schools, whether you're talking about roads, it costs money, and we take care of our folks. If you want everyone to move to places where they don't take care of our folks, and I say this to all my progressive friends, if you want them all leaving to go to places where they don't take care of people, that's a policy decision. But then don't get upset when suddenly they can't get any services when they're down in Florida.
But have
you?
Let me just say one more thing. This has been the plan of the conservative movement, the Heritage Foundation, for 40 years. Okay. Yep. Make it harder for progressive states to be quite so progressive. Make it so that there's so much pressure from their people saying our taxes are so high, you got to cut our taxes, you got to cut our services, stop supporting unions, stop insuring children, stop helping old people, stop taking care of the disabled, stop funding all this money for mass transit, stop doing all these progressive programs. You got to cut it. Put more pressure on us so we can't do those programs.
Don,
have you considered raising the cap? Would you support raising the cap to $40,000 or $50,000 so that these middle class people you're talking of?
David, before we answer that, and I just want to read Don Payne, who represents Newark, New Jersey, and other parts of Essex County, right, where obviously there's a lot of families that rely heavily on us looking out and helping them, right? He said, everyone will feel the impact of rolling back the SALT deduction, regardless of whether you took the deduction. And I think that's a very poignant statement, because his point is everybody will feel the pain of this in Jersey if we continue to let people leave and they're incentivized to leave because of SALT. Sorry.
All right, Congressman, can I get you to please answer David's question?
Yes,
what about raising the cap?
I'm going to answer David's question. I'm not going for that. Right now there's going to be a lot of negotiations. I'm not going to negotiate in the press. I want the full SALT repeal. I want the full cap repeal, because again, it is these middle class families that are hurt in real life. But we also don't want to lose these wealthy people leaving us, because it leaves a hole in our revenue sources. And as a result, the middle class and lower income people are left holding the bag. Like I said before, either you're going to see their taxes go up to fill the hole, or we're going to cut the services, which we don't think is good. This is why the repeal of the SALT cap has been supported by the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National Association of Counties, the National League of Cities, the International Association of Firefighters, National Association of Realtors, American Federation of Teachers, National Education Association, National Association of Police Organizations, as well as the governors of New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, California, Hawaii, Illinois, New York, Oregon, and so many others.
Okay, so we're talking this discussion at its crux is all about money, and the White House has put the question to both of you, congressmen. If you want support from the president to repeal the cap, you got to find a way to pay for it. The Tax Policy Center says it's about $100 billion that the government expends
Probably like 85 billion. Yeah. 85 billion
to have no cap, and so. How can you pay for that, especially when we're at a place where we're talking about these trillion-dollar investments in jumpstarting the country's economy after this devastating pandemic?
Stacey, as soon as the president, and it was actually his press secretary, made that point, and then I wrote a letter to the White House and to the administration saying, and this is something I know Tom and I are working on together, one great area of a pay for here is to close the tax gap, is basically to go after the tax cheats who don't pay their bills. The last administration gutted the IRS, threw out a bunch of those who actually audit, and scaled back on technology for finding the tax cheats. The new IRS commissioner has said that's $1 trillion a year problem. Right there alone is enough, even just a piece of that, to pay for reinstating the state and local tax deduction. Then, of course, there are a bunch of other places that we have suggested to help pay for this. It's not a question of whether we can pay for it, because we can, and that's a great way. The question is, are we going to do it? And Tom and I are here because we think we have to do it.
And listen, Josh is not ready to say it, but I'm ready to increase the top rate from 37 back to 39.6. I mean, that's the wealthiest Americans in the country. I have no problem with wealthy people paying taxes, okay? I just don't want to give an advantage that you pay less if you go to Florida than you do in New York. It shouldn't be an incentive to move out of my state to go to another state based upon listen, this tax deduction was in place for 100 years. It was the first tax deduction. It was set up in 1913. Actually, Lincoln put it in place back in the Civil War, but they got rid of it because of
Tom knew Lincoln.
But the whole thing is that there was an argument at the time. We don't want the federal government taking the long arm of the federal government, reaching into our cities and our states, stopping our governors, stopping our mayors from doing their programs. We don't want this federal income tax to screw up our plans as to what we want to do at the state and local level. They said, no, don't worry about it. We're going to put in place a state and local tax deduction, the first deduction in the entire federal income tax code. It was in place for 100 years. Our whole system in New York and New Jersey and California, Illinois, and the whole country was built around having that deduction in place. Now it was taken out, and really was a very overnight process. Quite frankly, it was very short back in 2017. They rammed it through. So it's just not fair that you pay taxes on taxes you pay. It's not fair that we've had this deduction in place for so long. It's not fair that people are being chased out of our state, and our colleagues in these other states are boasting about how they're taking people out of our states.
What about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act had many other changes, including doubling the standard deduction for a lot of families, lowered income tax rates, and raised the child tax credit. So what about those elements? Do you all want to see changes there too, or is this merely focused on SALT?
This is focused on SALT. This is our big focus is SALT. I speak for Josh as well as myself. We support this president, okay? I was the first member of the House of Representatives to publicly endorse Joe Biden when he announced his candidacy. He announced it at 7 o'clock in the morning. I endorsed him at 7:20 in the morning. I think he's going to do great things. I'm for big and bold. He wants to make the child tax credit, a permanent thing. He wants to expand the child tax credit bigger than it is, like it is in the American Rescue Plan. I'm all for that stuff. I'm all for big rail and roads and bridges and different types of important programs to make solar power and green energy. I want to do all that stuff. But give us back the state and local tax deduction. It is killing the blue states, including our states. We must have that back. No SALT, no deal.
A lot of these policies, obviously, the president proposed are critically important for our country. They're critically important for Jersey. and for people that we represent. I mean, that is, and Tom put his finger on it, right? I mean, everything from the electric grid, of course, to families and childcare, tax credit, all these things are critically important. What I worry about at the core, and this is something that's very important, you can add these other programs, and I think we can have a separate conversation about the scope and what it's got to look like and how we pay for it. But what you can't do is change the tax code on the families that I represent and raise their taxes without and do any changes in tax code policy. You can't go ahead without those things without addressing SALT. Right. So that's my challenge here. Like, I'm not comfortable making changes to the tax code without reinstating SALT, because you can't make things more expensive. And that's my test. I think, is life going to get more expensive for people in my district? If it is, I'm out. I can't have it. Things are too expensive now. And more importantly, if you make them more expensive, and I hope this is part of what we get out of this conversation today, and Tom made this point very well. If you do that, more people will continue to leave. And as people leave, the jobs leave, our tax base leaves, the programs for people we care about too are going to be hurt. That's the challenge, right? So this is again, a major threat to our states and to the values that we all care about. And so they go ahead with that without talking about SALT. I've made it very clear. No SALT, no dice. That's the deal. Like, no SALT, no dice. And that's the challenge, right? Because you can't go ahead with these things and hurt the people that we represent.
He says no SALT, no dice. I say no SALT, no deal.
By the way,
do you both have buttons?
I don't have buttons.
I do, and I'll get Stacey.
I have a tattoo on my hip.
Stacey, I'll send you one. You'll have it by tomorrow.
Do you have other members of Congress on board with you with this line in the sand? How many do you have?
So when this first happened, there was Josh, myself, and Bill Pascarell. Then we had about 8 members, including other members from New Jersey, that joined us, as well as some other states. Then I got 17 members of the New York delegation. 17 out of the 19 Democrats all signed a letter saying we will not, to the Speaker and to the Standing Committee, saying we will not hesitate to vote against this unless we get this SALT repeal. Then California wrote a letter with its entire delegation. So there's a lot
and
of
the SALT caucus, Suozzi.
And the SALT caucus, Josh and I, bipartisan actually.
33 people
signed up like right away. As soon as we announced it, they signed up right away. And the players on that were many members of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the Chief Tax Writing Policy Committee. This is a very big impact to a lot of very important players and their constituents throughout the country. Because this is real life stuff. This is like a real life hit to a lot of people. And this existential issue is really what it is. This is seeding. Look what happened to us during 9/11 and trying to get the money from the federal government. We had to fight. Hurricane Sandy. We had to fight like crazy to get that money. When we try to get the state and local tax, it's not tax, state and local aid as part of the American Rescue Plan, we had to fight for that. We're fighting for our regions all the time, and we're losing authority. New York, we lost so many members of Congress over the past 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We got to fight for our region. We have to fight for our states. It's an existential issue.
When they gutted SALT in 2017, it immediately had impacts across the board. So that there was an impact. Housing values immediately went down about 15%, right off the board. Why? Because it was more expensive to live in the state. Mark Zandi, who's the chief economist of Moody's, said that the SALT cap has cost homeowners $1 trillion in U.S. home value nationwide. And we know that for middle-class families, their home equity represents 42% of their wealth. So what we're doing, all these things are affecting this is a middle class issue. And I know it affects people also, the well-to-do, but it really hits hard in middle class pockets.
Okay, they're telling us we can wrap.
Is that what that bell meant? Perfect timing. That is actually all we have time to talk about the SALT deduction here today. I want to thank Congressman Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey, Congressman Tom Suozzi of New York, and my colleague David McKay Wilson, the Tax Watch columnist at the Journal News, for their time.
Good job, good job.
Thank you very much for tuning in. Of course, thank you for joining us. I'm Stacey Barchinger with the USA Today Network, New Jersey. Thanks for tuning in.